You know, if you are listening to this right now, it's pretty safe to say you are a learner. Like, you are the kind of person who is constantly tackling new, really complex subjects, always looking for that next paradigm shift.
Right, always trying to upgrade.
Exactly. And usually when we talk about acquiring a new skill, say learning to code or figuring out how to play the guitar, we treat it like downloading an app to your phone.
Yeah,
It's just a new, shiny tool you are adding to your existing operating system. But today, we are targeting a psychological phenomenon that completely shatters that illusion. I mean, we're looking at the pursuit of linguistic mastery.
it really does shatter the illusion, doesn't it?
I-
Because language learning is so frequently and honestly falsely portrayed as this dry academic hurdle.
Right, like a school subject.
Exactly. We tend to view it as just a massive spreadsheet of memorization tasks, just syntax, phonology, lexicon. But the reality of acquiring a new language isn't merely an academic endeavor. It is a profound structural psychological shift. Yeah, it literally alters how you perceive the world, how you process emotion, and ultimately how you define your own personality.
And to guide us through this today, we are pulling from this brilliant article titled The Dual Identity, Navigating Character and Language.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And it came with this highly specialized glossary of 30 advanced phrasal verbs, which we are going to use as our roadmap for this deep dive.
I love that approach.
Right. So our mission here is twofold. First, we are going to explore how learning a foreign language isn't just acquiring a tool, it's the literal construction of a completely new persona from scratch.
Hmm.
And second, we are going to master those 30 phrasal verbs that capture this intense journey, exploring how their literal and figurative double meanings map onto the psychology of learning.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this, because setting up an entirely new identity sounds incredibly daunting. Where does the actual psychological friction begin?
Well, it begins the very second you step out of that safe, controlled environment of a textbook and into a chaotic, real-world native speaker environment.
Right, the real world.
Yeah, because to truly grasp a language, one must first listen up. And I don't just mean hearing the words. I mean actively paying deep analytical attention to the cultural nuances, the rhythm, the unspoken social rules.
It's exhausting.
It is. The brain goes into complete overdrive trying to decode not just the vocabulary, but the actual intent behind it.
Which brings us right to the social barrier, because when you are hyper-focused on trying to listen up, you inevitably miss the rapid-fire social cues.
So constantly.
And native speaker circles will often unintentionally ice out beginners. Like, you literally feel the temperature drop in the room as you are excluded from the banter.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And neurologically speaking, being socially excluded, being iced out just because you missed a slang term, registers in the brain identically to physical pain.
And that physical response is key to understanding the sheer panic of those early learning stages. That feeling of social exclusion triggers immense frustration and this overwhelming pressure to keep up.
Yeah.
You're suddenly forced to maintain the exact same conversational pace as native speakers who have had, decades of practice. Or you risk becoming this silent, invisible observer in your own life.
It's like stepping onto a high-speed treadmill that is already running at an absolute sprint.
Yes.
You either keep up or you get violently thrown off into the drywall. And the social pressure just compounds the physical toll. I mean, think about what happens when you decide to meet up with friends or a language partner at a loud pub.
Oh, sensory overload.
Exactly. The cognitive load required to translate the music, the background noise, the idioms. It's so heavy that you feel like you might actually pass out. But I have to push back on this idea of physical exhaustion for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
We treat language learning like a mental puzzle, right? It's sitting at a desk or holding a pint at a bar. Are you telling me that simply listening to a new language burns enough physical energy to make someone actually lose consciousness?
Well, what's fascinating here is the sheer biological cost of cognitive overload. I mean, the brain already consumes about 20% of your body's energy just at rest,
Wow, just sitting there.
just sitting there. So when you are in an immersive linguistic environment, actively translating syntax and, crucially, suppressing your native language, your prefrontal cortex is burning through glucose at an astonishing rate.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we see well-documented cases of students engaging in these grueling 12-hour immersion sessions who literally collapse. It brings a brutal double meaning to the phrase.
Oh, the double meaning of pass out.
Right. The teacher might stand at the front of the room and pass out the day's worksheets while the student is slumped at their desk, ready to pass out from severe metabolic exhaustion.
That paints a terrifying picture of the modern classroom.
It really does.
And I guess it happens because highly motivated learners tend to load up their schedules. Like they treat their brains like smartphones they can just plug into the wall overnight.
Yes.
They load up on vocabulary, flashcards, grammar drills, podcasts, completely neglecting the physical need to look after their own nervous system.
And the failure to take care of themselves, to look after their baseline biological needs, is what really accelerates the psychological toll. If your brain is starved of glucose and sleep, emotional regulation becomes the very first cognitive function to fail.
Which perfectly explains why adults suddenly start acting like toddlers during these immersion programs.
Oh, 100%.
The input overload peaks, the prefrontal cortex essentially goes offline, and the frustration becomes so overwhelming that a normally composed professional might verbally or even physically lash out at a teacher or a peer.
It's a profound regression. When you lack the vocabulary to express complex adult emotions, your brain just reverts to primal reactions. You lash out because you are trapped inside a mind that is operating at a fraction of its usual expressive capacity.
So to counter that, you have to actively learn to keep down your rising anger.
Yeah.
And the analogy, the source material uses for this is incredibly visceral.
It really stuck with me.
Right. It likens the learner's experience to a traveler on a violently bumpy flight who has to keep down their lunch.
Yeah.
You aren't just repressing a mild frustration. You are battling this physiological, nauseating urge to reject the entire experience. You have to keep down the urge to quit just as much as you have to keep down your own bile.
It's pure cognitive dissonance. And living in that state of survival mode is totally unsustainable. If the internal pressure remains that high, the learner absolutely must find a way to lighten up.
They have to relax.
Exactly. They have to introduce play, humor, and relaxation back into the process. Because without the ability to lighten up and not take every single grammatical error so seriously, a very dark psychological shift occurs. The initial passion for the language will simply pass away.
And we usually reserve the phrase pass away as this gentle, polite way to talk about human death.
Right.
But here, it's the death of curiosity. The joy of discovery passes away, and you are left as this tragic figure the article calls the zombie student. Someone just mechanically going through the motions with dead eyes.
Just surviving.
Yeah. So what does this all mean for our sanity? I mean, if feeling literal nausea or the urge to lash out turns us into zombies, does that mean the learner has fundamentally failed?
Not at all. In fact, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the zombie student phase is not a failure at all. It's a highly evolved psychological defense mechanism.
Wait, really? A defense mechanism?
Yes. Your brain is actively rewiring its foundational identity. When the urge to lash out hits, or the passion seems to pass away, it is simply proof that your old native language operating system is violently resisting the new persona being installed.
Oh, wow.
The numbness is just the brain protecting itself during a major neurological renovation.
That reframing is a massive relief. The chaos isn't a bug. It's a feature of the installation process.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, the real world doesn't always grant us the luxury of a peaceful, prolonged mental renovation. All of these internal emotional struggles eventually spill over into the external world, specifically into the unforgiving arena of the global job market.
And the professional stakes attached to language acquisition are just astronomical right now. In a hyper-connected global economy, your linguistic persona is directly tied to your livelihood. Companies will not hesitate to lay off employees who refuse to adapt to cross-border communication.
And there's a brutal, almost poetic double meaning to lay off in the corporate world.
Oh, absolutely.
You might spend months praying that your manager will finally lay off the constant criticism of your slow language progress, like wishing they would just give you a break, only to find out that human resources has decided to lay off the employee entirely.
It's harsh. A sudden termination is obviously traumatic, but being laid off frequently forces individuals to look into entirely new career paths they never would have considered.
Right, a forced pivot.
Yeah, they are forced to investigate global markets or roles that actually require their developing dual identity.
But as you look into those shiny new opportunities, you have to look out for the traps.
Definitely.
You have to remain incredibly vigilant because the language learning industry is packed with predators pushing these get fluent quick schemes. And here's where the psychology of self-sabotage gets really interesting to me.
Oh, the shortcuts.
Yes. People will try to knock off early from their day jobs, sneaking out of the office an hour before their shift ends, just so they have extra time to study. But then, to save a few dollars, they will go online and buy a knockoff version of a highly complex textbook.
Or pirate, a cheap, poorly translated curriculum.
Exactly. They knock off work to use a knockoff book.
And this raises a really important question about the integrity of the learning process. And it isn't even a moral judgment. It is a cognitive reality.
Right.
When you compromise your study habits by relying on a knockoff curriculum, you are building your new linguistic identity on a fractured foundation.
Yeah.
You think you are cleverly cheating the financial system, but the only thing you are actually cheating is your own neuroplasticity.
It's the equivalent of building a skyscraper but stealing cheap, crumbling cement to pour the foundation.
That's a great analogy.
You are setting yourself up for a structural collapse. And if you push that fragile, cheap foundation too hard, you might completely knock out your nervous system.
Literally.
A lack of high-quality input combined with sleep deprivation will literally knock out a dedicated student, leaving them totally unconscious at their desk.
And to survive that intense professional and cognitive pressure, you ultimately have to let go. You have to release your rigid grip on the old, comfortable habits that used to define your success.
Let go of the past.
Exactly. And remember, the phrase let go is also a softer synonym for firing someone. In order to thrive, you essentially have to let go of the native language version of yourself. You have to fire your old ego.
Firing your own ego is a massive, painful sacrifice. But once you navigate those professional stakes, the journey takes us into what I think is the most nuanced and, frankly, terrifying territory of all.
The interpersonal dynamics.
Yes, interpersonal relationships, community dynamics, and the absolute minefield of cross-cultural romance.
The hierarchy of respect within any language learning community is deeply tied to this new identity. We naturally look up to polyglots. We admire them as if they possess superhuman cognitive abilities.
We put them on a pedestal.
We do, for having survived the very rewiring process we are currently suffering through.
But the shadow side of that admiration is linguistic arrogance. As learners gain fluency, it really reveals their true character. I mean, it is a sign of deep insecurity and poor character when a fluent speaker decides to look down on a beginner.
Oh, it's the worst.
The moment they start feeling superior just because their vocabulary is larger, the entire ecosystem turns toxic.
When a fluent speaker looks down on someone who is struggling, they fundamentally let down the entire community. They disappoint the collective because the implicit, unwritten social contract among language learners is mutual support.
Right.
Everyone knows how painful the zombie student phase is. So to let down a fellow learner is to forget your own origins.
And that expectation of clear, supportive communication gets infinitely more complicated when we introduce romantic context.
It really does.
The nuances of dating in a second language are staggering. You might use a phrase thinking you are just being polite and accidentally lead on a new acquaintance.
You give them completely false hope.
Exactly, just because you missed a subtle, pragmatic cue. But I want to pause and challenge the severity of this for a second.
Okay.
In our native languages, leading someone on is manipulative. But in a second language, can you really be blamed for leading someone on if you genuinely didn't understand the cultural weight of the idioms? Like, what if your intent was purely platonic?
That is the ultimate paradox of the dual identity. Intent frequently evaporates in translation.
Wow, evaporate.
Yeah. In your native tongue, your ego knows exactly where the boundary between friendly banter and flirtation resides. But in your new language, you are no longer judged by the cultural rules or intentions of your origin country. You are judged by the pragmatic realities of the target culture.
That's tough.
It is. If your words give false hope, the emotional impact on the other person is entirely real, regardless of your innocent intent.
That is terrifying. You are essentially being held legally responsible for the actions of a persona you haven't even fully finished building yet.
Precisely.
Which is why it's so crucial that when your linguistic clumsiness inevitably causes hurt, you must immediately make up for that mistake. You have to overcompensate with a sincere, culturally appropriate apology.
Exactly. And the goal of that apology is to make up with the person, to repair the breach and become friends again. But learners must be incredibly careful here because makeup carries a dangerous secondary meaning.
To invent a story.
Right, to fabricate an excuse. The worst thing you can do when trying to make up for a cultural blunder is to make up a dishonest excuse about why it happened.
No fabricated excuse is just total vulnerability. And if you manage that humility, you can genuinely look forward to a much deeper, barrier-free relationship. You can feel excited about the future of that connection. Which brings us to perhaps the most infamous high-stakes linguistic trap of all, the double meaning of make out.
Oh, this is the perfect distillation of everything we've been discussing.
Hmm.
In a purely auditory context, to make out means to manage to see, hear, or understand something with great difficulty.
Like trying to make out the lyrics of a song.
Exactly. Or trying to make out what your friend is saying across a crowded, noisy room.
But in a romantic context, to make out means to engage in passionate, heavy kissing.
Very different meaning.
Very different. So picture this. You are at a loud party, and the next day you text your new language partner to apologize, saying you couldn't quite make out with them at the party last night because the music was too loud.
Oh, no.
You went from politely asking for auditory clarification to aggressively bringing up a passionate physical rejection, all because of a slight misapplication of a phrasal verb. You're going to need to do a mountain of making up to fix that one.
It perfectly highlights how delicate the construction of this new persona really is. Every single interaction carries the weight of potential social disaster or profound connection.
It really does. And all of these emotional breakdowns, professional hurdles, and romantic minefields eventually converge on the very tangible, literal realities of achieving fluency.
Financial costs.
The financial costs and the ultimate breakthrough.
Because language learning at this immersive level is rarely free. The journey brings us to the harsh financial realities. You might rack up debt to a private tutor and need to pay back what you owe, returning the borrowed money.
Yeah.
Though, given the sheer mental torture some tutors put their students through, we should note that payback also means to take revenge.
Let's hope the new linguistic persona isn't a vengeful one. But seriously, the financial pressure is a massive stressor. If you fall behind on your tuition, an academy might aggressively demand that you pay up immediately.
And the consequences of failing to pay up are just devastating. If the funds aren't there, you might be forced to pass up the chance to take your final certification exams.
To decline it, basically.
Right, often against your will. It would be an absolute tragedy to endure the social isolation of being iced out, the physical nausea of the zombie phase, and all that professional anxiety, only to pass up a life-changing visa opportunity over a temporary financial shortfall.
But if you can weather that financial storm and navigate all the cultural minefields, you eventually reach the tipping point. You might finally luck out, experiencing a stroke of incredible serendipitous fortune, and find a truly phenomenal mentor.
And when you find that mentor, the entire psychological landscape shifts.
Right. You no longer dread the struggle, you learn to look up difficult concepts with genuine curiosity, and as you eagerly search for that new information, your circumstances also begin to look up.
Things start improving.
Everything starts to improve. The dual identity finally stabilizes.
And that stabilization is the ultimate synthesis we've been tracking here. When you luck out with the right guide, you no longer struggle to make out the cultural nuances.
Yeah.
You look up the information, you let go of your native language ego, and the new persona simply takes the wheel. The pursuit of linguistic mastery is complete when the knowledge is deeply understood and seamlessly applied.
You're beautiful.
Looking up a phrasal verb isn't just about passing a vocabulary test anymore. It is the final, vital step in fully inhabiting this second identity.
It completely transforms the narrative. What started as a grueling, nauseating burden becomes a massive triumph of neuroplasticity.
Absolutely.
So, let's step back and survey the landscape we've traversed in this deep dive today. We have successfully navigated the social, emotional, professional, and financial minefields of language learning.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've seen how the brain burns physical calories just to keep up, why the urge to lash out is actually a sign of neural rewiring, and why self-sabotage with a knockoff textbook is basically a crime against your own intellect. And we managed to decode 30 essential, multi-layered phrasal verbs that act as the scaffolding for this entire journey.
It is a remarkable, deeply human journey of transformation.
It absolutely is. So, to the learner listening to this right now, the next time you feel completely overwhelmed by a new complex subject or you feel like that cognitive treadmill is moving way too fast, I want you to remember this deep dive.
Yeah, keep in mind.
Remember that hitting the numb zombie student phase or feeling that visceral urge to give up isn't a sign that you are failing. It is simply the messy, chaotic, beautiful construction phase of your entirely new persona.
And it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative psychological question to consider.
Ooh, what's that?
If acquiring a new language truly forces you to construct a completely new persona, An avatar with its own unique thoughts, emotional reactions, and cultural instincts.
Right.
When you finally achieve true fluency and you begin to spontaneously dream in that new language, which version of you is actually having the dream?
Wow. Next time you close your eyes, you might just be waking up as someone else entirely. Until next time, keep learning.